everyone. Welcome back to the question where you have the questions and I have the answers. And I realized recently that while I love history, I love analyzing pieces of media and ranting about them, especially when they involve history a lot more. So I will be discontinuing the amendment series unless you ask for what certain amendments mean. I will gladly tell you because once again, I still love history. But I'm going to start ranting about more media and more queer history because I feel like that's not talked about enough, and just because something that's bothered me is I had to do a presentation uh, on my school's GSA, and I realized while I was making the presentation, because it's about queer history, a lot of the queer biopics that we have, and by a lot I mean the very few that we have, are very homophobic, at least the ones that I have seen have been very homophobic, and that is the complete opposite of what we need queer biopics to be. Because even though homophobia or transphobia exist a lot within queer history, and they are a main story point, that's not what the movie should be about, and that's not what the underlying message should be. And so for the start of this new series revamping of my channel, we're going to talk about the Imitation Game and Alan Turing, because I love Alan Turing so much. He is my gay child, and I've cried tears over his story because it's so heartbreaking. And originally, I spent years not watching The Imitation Game because I know how it ends. Spoiler alert from here on out. He dies. He is killed or commits suicide. We don't know, but I'll get into that later. But anyway, he dies because he is gay. And I didn't want to watch it until starring Benedict Cumberbatch because I had a really big obsession with Benedict Cumberbatch, and I didn't want to see him die because I knew how the story would end. But anyway, I was just scrolling through Instagram and saw someone ranting about how inaccurate Imitation Game was, and I was like, I have to go watch this. And the amount of dirty this movie did my child is upsetting. So basically, Alan Turing is a crypto analyst during World War II. He's a British crypto analyst, and he and his team are the ones who crack the Enigma code, and which then leads to the downfall of the Nazis and the end of the war in the European theater. And many people at the time, and even nowadays, credit his team and his cracking of the Enigma code with ending the war early, and it could have gone on for at least 8 more years if they hadn't figured out how to crack the Enigma code, which was this encryptions that the Germans used to make sure that none of their info got out. And so he did that. He also invented the Turing test, which tests for AI in computers. Basically, Siri is because of him. Siri and Google and Alexa we have because of this man. So that's what he did, and now we get to the sad part of the story, which is he is a gay man, and he was a very proud gay man. But there was just a time where being gay was illegal, even in the Allied countries. Even in the good guys, being gay was illegal. But that didn't stop him. He still loved his life, and he loved the people that he dated. And eventually he was arrested because one of his ex-boyfriend's new boyfriends broke into his house. And when asked how he knew the man, it came out that he was gay, and so they arrested him for that because technically he was a security threat for being gay, and because he had all the government access from being a crypto analyst during the war. And he was later ruled guilty, and they forced him into hormone therapy for 3 years to try and make him not gay. And he was found dead shortly after, and it was ruled a suicide despite having zero evidence of him having any suicidal thoughts, actions. He had no prior mental illnesses, and they couldn't actually prove that he died from what he died from, or that he had access to what he died from, which was cyanide poisoning. And so many historians today believe that it was actually the British Secret Service who had killed him and made it look like a suicide. But anyway, so that's the story. And The Imitation Game was very much not that. And the Imitation Game is weird because it's being told from a perspective of he's being arrested and then he's recanting the story of his time during World War II. And so we're getting a flashback, but then within the flashbacks, we're getting further flashbacks to this friend that he had and his first crush in grade school, and like that realization of he's gay. Um, but they never actually mention that he's gay or explicitly state that he's gay. They use a lot of euphemisms around it. And what bothers me is that one, they never explicitly state it, and two, when they do eventually come out that heavily imply that he's gay, they make it seem like one, it's a secret, or two, that it's like the worst thing in the world. Like they really do treat his sexuality as if it is an actual crime, warranting the punishment which he is given, warranting the actions taken against him. And that's such a harmful narrative, and that's a narrative that we see a lot in films depicting queer characters, is that bad things happen to them because of their sexuality or because of their identity. And I'm going to get more into this because there's a lot of other examples. This is just the first one. And that's what bothers me the most, is that they show Alan Turing being ashamed of it, trying to hide, trying to lie about his sexuality because he knows this bad thing's going to happen, when in reality he was very, very proud about it. And even though he wasn't publicly out, to a lot of people, because it was illegal at the time, when they arrested him, his brother went on record saying, no, I had to convince him, to plead not guilty to get a lighter sentence other than, jail or death, because he just said, no, I didn't commit a crime, therefore I'm not, therefore I'm not guilty or whatever. Or they had to get him to plead guilty because he kept saying he wasn't guilty of the crime because he never committed a crime, because being gay should not have been a crime. Which is a very different message than what the movie portrayed. The movie wasn't about, he was wrongfully arrested for something that isn't a crime, something that's completely natural that you should be proud of. It was he was kind of an asshole, and he did this thing, but everybody's kind of indifferent about it, and then we kill him off because, which also wasn't true. People pointed out that Benedict Cumberbatch just plays really asshole and narcissistic type people, and that's true. That's very true, and that doesn't reflect Alan Turing as a person at all, who was a very kind-hearted man who had lots of friends and was very well liked and well received in his work. He would create games and draw chessboards and checkerboards and crosswords for people and kids who were displaced by the bombings during World War II. And that kind of message wasn't, that kind of depiction of him wasn't put out in the movie. And you're probably like, well, yeah, biopics aren't going to be completely accurate. But this also gives in the harmful narrative of he's a terrible person, he's an asshole, he's a narcissist, he deserves the fate that he got, which isn't something that we need, especially, in queer stories. And that's why I feel like even though it could be a good movie, it's not a good representation of the history that it's about. It's not a good representation of the person that it's about. And there are better stories and better, less known biopics about Alan Turing, aside from The Imitation Game, that are more accurate, that are actually played by gay men. Because also, Benedict Cumberbatch is not gay, he is not queer, and so that in of itself is an issue, and you can take any stance you want of should gay people be playing gay characters, or should they at least be writing in the background. But there were no gay consultants, no queer consultants in this movie, no queer people on set to make this movie. And I think that's also an issue in a lot of these biopics and a lot of these pieces of media centered around queer pain, and maybe even justifying queer pain and like the underlying story, as The Imitation Game does, is because it's not being written from a queer perspective, it's being written from a straight perspective of this is the history behind it, where it's like, yeah, this was what happened, but you told it as if it was inevitable, or as if it should have happened. Where it shouldn't have happened, it was wrong. And your story doesn't state that. It doesn't state that it was wrong. It states that, oh, it happened, and of course it happened because this thing is always going to happen to gay people and to queer people. And that doesn't only send out a message to straight and cishet people saying, oh yeah, gay people are supposed to suffer, they're gonna suffer, it's inevitable. It also sends out the message to the LGBTQ plus community saying, well, of course life is gonna be harder. Life is gonna be harder because you're existing as you are. And that's such a harmful message, because now it's saying that, well, you're wrong. You know, you shouldn't exist. You're existing incorrectly and you shouldn't be here. And we don't need that kind of messaging, especially, uh, you know, especially to such young and impressionable audiences. I mean, it shouldn't be happening to anybody, but it shouldn't. It's a very harmful narrative, and movies like this, especially the very few times we get representation in history, and to take such a great and brilliant and important historical figure just happens to also be gay, and to twist that story in such a way, and to twist his person in such a way, it makes me very angry, and it's very, very harmful. And the fact that this has been done multiple times and it's become so normalized within media that, you know, if there's queer representation, it has to be about pain and about suffering, and not just because the outside world is wrong. It has to be because you're wrong, you know? Because a lot of queer media depicts how, you know, homophobia and transphobia, but it rarely ever depicts that the homophobia and the transphobia is wrong. You know, it's always about this person's self, you know, and they have to go through the struggle and they have to change and they have to be proud of themselves, which they should be. But it's always centered about how the queer person is reacting to it, or how someone's reacting to the queer person, and never how that person has to go through and realize that, hey, maybe accepting people is better. We never see that. We very rarely see that. And so that's just one of the really, really big issues I have with queer media, is that so much of it is done incorrectly. And then when queer media is done correctly, or it's about queer joy, it's shot down as it's not safe for kids, or we can't have it influencing other people, when we need this kind of media to show that it is completely okay to be gay and to be trans and to be queer and ace and aro and all of these things. And yeah, I don't know where I went with this. I said about how the Imitation Game kind of sucks, but also I think you should definitely research Alan Turing, because queer history is not at all taught, and even, you know, during all these other heritage or historical months, we don't talk about queer aspects of that race or ethnicity. And so I'm going to try and be inclusive in my storytelling and what is represented, but I'm going to be honest, I do come from a place of privilege, and a lot of the people that I know of and that I've learned about are also white and European, but I will do my best to create a diverse experience. I just happen to start with Alan Turing because it grinds my gears how dirty that movie portrayed him. Thank you for listening, and I hope y'all enjoyed this, because I definitely enjoyed talking about this more than I talking about the Bill of Rights. So long, and thanks for all the fish. Be excellent to each other, and party on, dudes.